Welcome back everyone. For today's video we are going to be taking a look at the Speed Chess Championship being held on chess.com. Now, as you guys know, Magnus Carlsen punched his ticket to the finals yesterday with a very convincing 22-7 drubbing of my fellow American compatriot Wesley So. Now, today was the other semifinal match featuring myself and of course Maxime Vachier Lagrave from France, commonly known as MVL. Now, I am the 5-time defending champion, having beaten Magnus last year, but anything can happen. So let's jump right into the action. So the first game we're going to be taking a look at is this game between myself with the white pieces, Maxime with the black pieces, the very first game of the match in the 5+1 portion. So I start out by playing knight c3 here. Now this of course is known as the classic Van Geet opening. I obviously did not do any preparation before the event, but I figured that if I'm playing Maxime is a player who likes to play a couple of very specific systems. First of all, against e4, he loves to play his classic knight or Sicilian. And if I were to play something like d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, he plays the Grunfeld. So when I play knight c3 on move 1, my reasoning, and I only thought about this for about 10 to 15 seconds before the game started, was that if Maxime were to play something like e5, then I can go e4, and we've actually transposed into a Vienna opening, which normally comes out of e4, e5, knight c3. Now Maxime pretty much exclusively plays the Sicilian, so I'd be very happy with that. So when I play knight c3, I'm trying to take Maxime out of his favorite theory and into something that he's a little bit less comfortable with. So Maxime plays d5. Now if Maxime were to play c5 here, I would have actually played knight f3, not e4, because after e4, d6 or knight c6, we're back in the classic Siciliano. So Maxime instead plays d5, and now I play e4, and we've actually transposed into the Scandinavian or the center counter opening. Normally this occurs with the moves e4, d5, and then knight to c3. So already here I'm feeling very good because I've gotten Maxime out of his preparation. We're in a different system, and hopefully good things will happen. But at the end of the day, Maxime is a very, very strong player, and so he can play many different setups. So he trades the pawns on e4 and goes knight to f6, and here I play the move knight to g3. Now knight g3 is not the best move here. What I should play is knight takes knight, and black can take either with the e pawn or the g pawn. Normally they take with the e pawn, and after d4, bishop d6, bishop d3 castles, knight e2. Black can play either c6, maybe even h5, which is a very topical move these days, and we're back in a Caro-Kann. Now Maxime, even though he plays the Sicilian almost exclusively, has played the Caro-Kann before, so I figured, why do I want to trade knights and go into something like that? So instead I play knight g3. Now knight g3 is a move, but it is a little bit dubious here for a couple of reasons. First of all, you're moving the knight away from the center, so black can push e5 or c5. Additionally, black also has this h5 move, which could be very scary. Now normally this position where this occurs is actually in the Caro-Kann with c6, knight f3 takes, knight f6, knight g3, and then h5. And this is very, very tricky to play for both sides. So in game number 1, when I play knight g3, I'm figuring, well, maybe Maxime won't play h5, h4. Maybe I can just develop knight f3, bishop c4, maybe knight f3, bishop b5. Smooth, simple development. I should get out of the opening very easily. So Maxime plays c5 here, and now I go b3. Now b3 I think is a little bit too extravagant. Probably what I should have played was something like knight f3 and bishop b5 right away. Instead I go b3 with the idea that if black plays e5 here, I can simply go bishop b2, knight c6, and now bishop b5, and all of a sudden there's all kinds of pressure towards the pawn on e5 in the center because of these bishops, and white should have a big advantage. Instead, Maxime plays g6, and I thought this was a very, very good move. Maxime plays this move without using a lot of time either, and it shows good understanding because Maxime gets his classic fianchetto here with the bishop on g7. So I go bishop b2, he plays bishop g7, and now I play this move knight f3. And pretty much as soon as I played knight f3, I was upset with myself because I felt that I should have played bishop b5 check first, and after bishop d7, let's say we trade the bishops, I go knight f3, castles, queen e2, knight c6. I can castle kingside, I can castle queenside. Maybe black has a very small advantage, but it's very easy to play here because I can put the rooks on e1 and d1, try to play for d4, and all my moves are very natural and free flowing. Instead I play knight f3, Maxime castles, and now I have to put my bishop on e2, which is not where I want the bishop. I'd ideally like to put the bishop on either c4 or b5, but if I go to b5, black plays a6, kicks the bishop, plays b5, and then gets the classic double fianchetto. So black gets a double fianchetto, and what do I have in return for it? Nothing except wasted time because I helped him push p on the queen side. Additionally, if I play bishop c4, there's the exact same problem where black can just go a6 with the idea of b5. Now maybe I can play a4 here, but after knight c6, castles, and bishop g4, black has ideas like knight b4, knight d4 as well. A lot of pressure, and I don't really have any pieces in the center of the board. So I play bishop e2, Maxime plays knight c6, and now I realize already that I have to castle, and after knight d4 I'm at a big disadvantage. If I were to play d4 here, which is the traditional way of approaching it, after takes and knight takes d4, I simply am dead lost after queen a5 check, because if I block with the queen, black trades the queens, goes rook d8, pinning the knight on d4. If I play c3, black goes to e5, uh-oh, spaghetti-o, GG, why not? And if I play a move like king e3, black is knight d5, opening up this long diagonal for the bishop and the knight, and it's totally hopeless. So I have to castle, and after knight d4, now black is claiming a big black center here because I can't push the pawn to d4. So I trade the knights, and now I go bishop f3, trying to argue that maybe I can prevent black from developing this bishop and pressuring the pawn on b7, maybe rook e1 as well, maybe c3, but hoping to create some play. So Maxime plays queen b6 here, a nice move, moving the queen to b6 because he realizes that the bishop can just move to e6. You're never going to try to fianchetto it with his bishop on f3. So he intends to go to d7 or c6. Additionally, after queen b6, if I ever play c3 and takes occurs, the queen spies the pawn and the king on this diagonal, and black always has something like rook to d8 as well. So a very, very logical move from Maxime. I play rook e1 here, and now he goes bishop e6, and here I felt like I probably have something, but I simply couldn't figure it out. So I play this move knight to e2 after a 30-second thing, and this move is simply a blunder based on a tactical miscalculation. So when I play knight to e2 here, what I'm figuring is that black has to guard the pawn with rook d8 like in the game, and now I go knight f4, hitting the bishop on e6. If you move the bishop away, I can simply take on e7, and I'm up a pawn. I've got a kebab on the 7th. It's all very hunky-dory. But as it turns out, when I play knight f4 and bishop f5 occurs in the game, if I go rook takes e7, there's a move queen d6, hitting the rook and the knight at the same time. I can't move my knight here to guard the knight, because after knight, takes, and queen takes rook, I simply resign the game. So I'm already feeling very, very unhappy with myself here, and I decide to go all in with this aggressive move g4 by pushing the p in front of my king. Now the reason I play this is because I simply did not see a good plan in mind. I didn't see a good plan here in the position. I thought I'm just a little bit worse. Black can go rook c8, pressure the pawn on c2, knight on f4, very misplaced. If black ever gets e5, I just resign, and so I thought I might as well go for it. So I played g4. Maxime plays queen c7, a good move here. Black does not want to move the bishop back to c8 because now after g5 I'm hitting the knight, and queen d6 here would lose because I can take the knight. He takes my knight, I take his bishop, and I have an extra bishop, and I win the game. So black has to move the knight to, let's just say, e8, and now after knight to d5 I'm forking the queen and the pawn. The rook is coming in, and white should be much better. So Maxime goes queen c7. Now he's attacking my knight. I don't really have a good square for my knight. If I go to g2, for example, just bishop e6 back, and now if I play g5, knight d5, there's no knight getting to the central square because my knight has been pushed back, and so black is just much better. So I decide to take the bishop. Maxime takes my knight, and now I take on g6. He takes back, and I go bishop takes b7, and here Maxime plays this move rook to b8 pretty quickly. Now I was quite concerned about this move knight g4, hitting both the pawns on h2 and f2 at the same time, all while creating the classic right triangle. My intention was to play queen f3, but after queen h2, king f1, and this nice move queen c7 retreating, black is just much better because the queen guards the pawn on e7. If I take the rook, my king and my queen get forked, and I lose once again. And after queen takes g4, queen b7, black is quite a bit better here because my king is a little bit open. I have no protection. Black seems very, very safe with these pawns on f7 and g6 and the bishop as well. And black can even go e5 and f5 later on, and it should be close to lost. But Maxime instead plays rook to b8, which is also a good move here because now I have to figure out what I'm doing. Now I play queen to f3, trying to trade off the queens desperately, and Maxime plays queen to c7, retreating the queen backwards. Now you'll probably notice the evaluation bar is not showing this as being fantastic, but this actually makes a lot of sense here in a blitz game because I'm using a lot of time. I'm already down a minute 40 seconds, and black has obvious ideas to lift the rooks. So I go bishop e4 here, and now Maxime plays rook b5, intending to swing the rook to g5 or h5 here, and it's very, very hard to play. Now here I play this move bishop d3, which simply loses on the spot. I was originally going to play queen g3, but I think after queen g3 I was worried about queen a5 with this rook g5 idea. Pawn on d2 is under attack. We also have a square and a right triangle as well, and it just feels very hard to play. So I played bishop d3, expecting rook to h5, and after h3 I think maybe I'm in some trouble after e5, but perhaps I can save the game. But when I go bishop d3, Maxime plays rook g5 check, tickling the king, and I'm simply lost here no matter where I go. Now in the game I go king f1. If I were to play king to h1, there's knight to g4, threatening mate on h2 here, and after say queen g3 and bishop e5, rook takes e5, queen takes e5. It looks like I might have a fork with f4 hitting the queen and the rook, but after queen d5 once again, or not queen d5, sorry. Oh, knight f2 first, right? This knight f2 first, queen f2, queen d5. I simply lose the game because my king has no squares. So I go king f1. Maxime plays knight g4, threatening to fork the king and the queen here. I play king to e2, trying to run away to the center of the board and protection with the bishop and the pawns in front of the king, but it is to no avail. After knight takes h2, I play queen h3. Maxime goes queen f4 here, intending to hit both the pawns on f2 and d2. There's rook h5, there's knight f3, knight g4, and against a player of Maxime's caliber, it's just totally hopeless. So I play rook h1, he goes rook e5, I go king d1, and now he plays queen takes f2. Now knight g4 also would have been very effective, threatening the classic family fork here, forking the queen, the king, the bishop, and the rook all at the same time. But Maxime plays queen f2 instead, which is also more than enough, because if I try to grab the horse here on h2, there's rook to e1 check. I have to take the rook, and after queen takes queen, even though I have a rook and a bishop for the queen, black has all these kingside pawns, and he'll just push p, get a second queen, and win the game very soon. So I play bishop a3. Maxime plays rook to h5 here. I play rook takes knight, and now Maxime plays queen takes h2. Queen g1 also would have won on the spot, but after queen takes h2, I have to trade the queens, go king c1, but after e5, king b2, f5, e4, and d3, black will get the connect 4. The diagonal's opening up for the bishop. All the pawns are hanging on the second rank, and it's a total disaster. So in this position, after queen takes h2, I simply resign this first game, and Maxime takes a 1-0 lead. So after losing this first game, you figure, well, it's just the first game, just getting warmed up. It's like the car when it's sputtering. You turn the keys like click, click, click. It's just sputtering. It's going to turn around right away. But it would not turn around right away for me. In fact, I would go on to lose the next 2 games and be down 3-0 from the get-go. Now, the 4th game I was able to draw, and in the 5th game I was able to win to finally get it back to a 2-point margin, where that would have made the score, I believe, 3.5 to 1.5. Game 6 was also a draw, and the next game we're going to be taking a look at is game number 7 of the match, where I am trailing by a score of 4-2. So after these 3 horrific losses, I win a game, I draw a game, get a win, draw another game. So I'm really trying to get back into the match. So in this game, I start with e4 here, something a little bit different. At this point, I also already realized that I'd have to be a little bit closer to reality and play more normal openings against a player of Maxime's caliber. I could not just dilly-dally with all sorts of random nonsense and get away with it. So I go e4, Maxime plays c5, knight f3, d6, and now I play bishop b5. This move, whether it's against d6 or knight c6, traditionally referred to as the Rosslimo or the canal attack, not to be confused with the root canal, which is very, very unpleasant. So here Maxime plays bishop d7. I trade the bishops. I decide to play d3 here. Now this d3 c3 idea that I come up with in the game here, to be very clear, is based on many games that I played in a different lifetime years and years ago. I believe it was on the chess-based server called Play Chess against a Serbian player. I believe that his name actually, or the account name is his name, which was Dusan Popovic. And I would always play this, we'd always play this system here where after castles, knight c6, I'd go like c3, knight f6, d3. And Dusan would always play this very slow rook e1, knight f1, something like knight g3, followed by d4. And it's a very simple setup. I also played it against Wesley So in the Speed Chess Championship in the past, but I simply was trying to channel my inner Dusan Popovic in this game. So I decided to play d3, c3, d3, doesn't really matter which order. Maxime plays knight c6, I castle, he goes e6, I play c3, and now he plays d5, trying to strike in the center. Here I play queen to e2, and Maxime decides to become very aggressive by castling the king to the queen side. Now this is not necessarily bad per se, but later on in the match, Maxime would actually play knight to e7, and after knight bd2, knight g6, g3, he played bishop e7, h4, and castles. We had many battles in this position as well, and it wasn't really conclusive who's doing better. So early in the match, Maxime decides to castle to the queen side. I play knight bd2, and now he goes bishop d6, trying to develop his knight to e7 and having the bishop spying the pawn on h2. So here I go a3, Maxime plays knight g7, and now I go b4, trying to attack on the queen side immediately here. This is also, of course, the classic bathtub formation as well, with the 4 pawns. Here Maxime plays knight g6, and now I go g3, stopping him from jumping to f4 with the knight. He goes f5, and now I trade on c5, and I play this move e5. Now already here I thought I was doing quite well because I have an open b file to attack with. Maxime doesn't really have any open files yet. He can maybe go f4, which he does in the game. If he plays h5, h4, it's also a little bit slow after d4, bishop b6, because I can play h4, f4, and even a move like king g2 here, because after takes, black has no entries, there's no pawn pushes, and I have a really nice white central pawn chain from c3 to e5. So Maxime plays f4, trying to be aggressive right away. I play knight to b3, attacking the bishop and hitting the pawn on f4, and he goes bishop b6. Now I think bishop b6 is a mistake. I think he probably should have gone to e7, even if objectively this is much worse after d4 because of the chain and the open b file. After he plays bishop b6, my next sequence of moves become too obvious and easy to play. So here I go a4 with the idea to kick the bishop off its diagonal and then jump to c5 with the knight. So Maxime plays queen f7, I go a5, goes bishop c7, and now I play d4, building the big white center, which actually can't really be touched here because there are no pawn exchanges anywhere. You don't have a pawn on c5, you can't get a pawn to f6, your pawn's on f4. So the structure is really good for white. And I also have knight to c5, basically the mirror of knight to f4, and if you get the knight to c5, it's probably going to be over very quickly. So Maxime goes queen f5, trying to stop this knight g5 fork. I go knight to c5 here, and he decides to take on a5. Now already here the game is effectively over because queen b5 is pretty much unstoppable. If black plays a6 to stop queen b5, then I go queen b2, hitting the pawn. There's really no way to guard the pawn. If you play knight takes pawn, I sack the rook with rook takes a5, and after bishop a5, queen b7, it's simply checkmate. So Maxime plays bishop takes a5, and now I go queen b5, attacking the pawn and the bishop at the same time. Maxime plays bishop b6. He could have gone queen f7 to guard the pawn, but after knight to g5, these knights are forking here on e6. Everything is hanging. There's even rook takes a5 as well. There are many different ways for white to be winning. So Maxime goes bishop b6, but now I have the crushing blow. Rook takes a7. I sack the rook on a7, and Maxime has to resign the game here because mate is pretty much inevitable, much like Thanos. If black were to play bishop takes a7, there's queen takes b7, checkmate. If you were to go bishop takes knight, queen takes b7 is also checkmate. And if you take with the knight, I take the bishop. I'm hitting both the pawn and the knight at the same time. After queen f7, queen takes a7. I have knight and bishop for the rook. King is very open here. I also have knight g5 to fork the queen and the pawn, and it's just an absolute disaster. So after I sack the rook, I win the 7th game. I move the match back to 4-3. In game number 8, I would win a very nice game to even up the match at 4-4. And the next game we're going to look at is with the match tied at 4-4. This would be the final game of the 5+1 portion. In this game, I'm starting with the white pieces. Now, to give some context, in game number 8, Maxime simply blundered a piece quite early in the game, so it felt like momentum was starting to shift in my favor, especially considering that I lost the first 3 games. So I start with knight f3 in this game. Maxime plays d5. I go b3, classic system that I played many times over the years. We get knight f6. I play e3. Maxime plays g6, bishop b2, bishop g7, and now I play c4. Now Maxime, of course, a big proponent of the Grunfeld setup, so he gets his setup, but I still feel very comfortable in this position. However, the one danger to playing the system against Maxime is that in the previous round, when I was doing live coverage of his match against Nihal Sarin, Nihal played this system against Maxime. So Maxime obviously was ready for the system to some degree, so there was some danger in playing it. So we get castles. I play d4 here. Maxime plays c6, bishop d3, bishop g4, knight d2, knight d7, h3. We get the swap, e6, castle, queen c2 first, queen e7, castles, and now Maxime plays rook c8. Now I swear I've probably had this position, I'm going to guess at least 100 times online, but I always play rook c1 here, and then Maxime plays this move c5 very quickly, and just like that, I realized that even though I might have a small advantage, it's going to be very difficult to prove, and I'm not sure what to do. So because I'm not sure what to do and it's a move I've never seen before, I figure I have to go in punishment mode. If I've never seen the move before, it must be bad, and I have to look for a logical way to take advantage of it. So I decide to trade the pawns on d5, and now I go bishop to a3, pinning the pawn on c5 as well as the queen on e7, and of course I have a double stack on the c file. Here Maxime plays queen to d8, and now I take this pawn, expecting Maxime to play something like bishop to f8 or maybe b6, maybe a5, and overlooking the very obvious move queen to a5. Now, as soon as Maxime played queen a5, I got really angry at myself because, of course, what I had missed was that if I play bishop b2, black just goes knight b4, and it looks like the game is over because when I move the queen to, say, b1, black takes my bishop on b2. If I move the rook, you just move the bishop away, and you have an extra horse here. And if I were to capture the bishop, I lose the bishop on d3, and the queen and rook get forked, and I simply resign. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts to it. So I thought this was really bad. Now, if I had been sharper, perhaps I would have realized that after bishop b2 and knight b4, I do have this move bishop c3, pinning the knight here, and I'm still very much in the game. Now, it's probably still bad after takes and rook c5, but at least here after bishop c4, I'm simply only going to be down one pawn in this endgame after rook to a1. Instead, I basically panic and I play this move e4 because I'm very upset with myself at this point in time, feeling like I finally clawed my way back in the match. We've gotten to even, and now I just make a very basic blunder here at the end of the 5+1 portion. So I play e4 instead. Maxime goes knight to f4, and now I play this move g3 here, trying to attack the knight. Now what I'm hoping for is if Maxime moves the knight to h5, I can go bishop b2 because there's no knight b4 anymore, and after rook c5, queen b1, it's just very much a game. So Maxime takes on h3 with check. If he were to take on d3, I can take the knight back because now after queen a3, queen d7, material is even once again. So he goes knight h3. I play king g2. Maxime takes the pawn on f2. I take the knight. He takes the bishop, and now the dust has settled to some degree. I'm simply down a pawn here. I have 5 pawns on the board. Black has 6 pawns, but even worse than that, we have opposite color bishops, and black has a 4-on-2 on the king side, so his king on g8 should be very safe. So here I play rook c4. Now this is a move that basically the idea is simply if black were to play rook c5, maybe I have ideas like rook a4. If black goes knight c5, maybe I have rook c1, creating the double stack here. Now after b6, b4 does nothing because the queen takes bishop, but at least it looks a little bit scary, and I might even have knight g5 here with this big threat towards the pawn on f7. So when I go rook c4, I'm sort of just hoping to create play, and I'm just waiting for whatever Maxime does. Now here Maxime plays rook takes c5, which is a serious mistake because now I have knight to d4, and suddenly there's massive pressure towards the pawn on f7. But besides the pressure, it's all about the knight placement here, and the reason that this is so bad suddenly for black is that the logical move to play is knight to e5, forking the rook and the bishop and guarding the pawn on f7. But if you play knight to e5, I have this very nasty move rook to a4, trapping the queen here. Now keep in mind the rook is in the way of the queen. The queen cannot move anywhere, and if you play not knight d3 right away, if you sack the queen, take the bishop, I take the pawn. After king h8, knight e6, rook c2, and let's just say king h1, white is simply winning. So all of a sudden it gets very tricky here in this position because the f7 pawn is hanging. I also have knight c2 tricks as well. Say black were to play a move like what's the logical move, like black were to play rook f8, I guess rook a4 still wins, and if black were to play knight f6 here, I guess rook a4 wins, but knight c2 is also winning here because I create the fossil where I attack everything all at the same time. So it's very, very tricky for Maxime to play, and he ends up playing rook takes c4 to relieve the pressure. But now I get queen takes f7 check, king h8, and I go knight takes e6, threatening to mate him on g7. Now I'm leaving this rook on pre on c4, but black cannot save it here. If you go rook c2, I just take the rook. And if you go queen b2, trying to check the king and guard the bishop here, I simply have rook f2, and now your rook is under attack, your queen is under attack, everything is simply collapsing. So Maxime plays rook g8, and now I play this move queen takes d7, which is a mistake. Now as you can tell from the clock here, I have 2 minutes and 37 seconds. Maxime has 48 seconds, so I'm ahead by nearly 2 full minutes. I know Maxime has made a mistake here, and I'm feeling really good, so I spent a lot of time and I precisely blunder with queen takes knight. Now bishop takes c4 would have been the best move. The reason I did not play this is because after knight to e5, I simply did not see a way to continue the attack. It looks like knight g5 is actually a really nice move, threatening to mate on g8, because if black takes the queen, knight takes knight is the classic smothered checkmate. King simply is stuck in the box. But after knight g5, black can go rook to f8, for example, and suddenly there are no threats. Even after queen b7, the knight on e5 covers the square, and I didn't see any way to win. So I spent a lot of time before going for this. Computer actually thinks after takes knight e5, queen takes b7 is apparently still good for white, simply because after takes queen a2, rook f2, queen takes c4, I can take on g7, and if black plays rook g7, I have queen b8 check. If queen g8, I have rook f8, winning the game. And after rook g8, I have queen e5 check, rook g7, rook f8 check, queen g8, takes, and queen e8 checkmate. So this would have been very good. I'm actually not sure why I rejected this. I think I had looked at some variation like this, but I think that what I thought was somewhere around here. I think I thought something like bishop to e5 could have been very dangerous, although as it turns out, I can sack the queen with queen takes h7, and after king h7 and rook h1, this is simply checkmate. So I spent a lot of time. I didn't really see a forced way through, and so then I figured, well, if I take the knight, we keep the opposite color bishops on the board. This knight on e6 is very dangerous. I have knight g5, knight f7, maybe rook h1, knight g5, maybe knight f4, knight g6, and queen h3 mate. And I just thought that considering the time situation, it was better to keep the imbalance with the knight versus the rook. So here Maxime plays rook c3, and now I go knight g5, trying to smother checkmate him on f7. He plays rook to f8 here, which is a mistake. He probably should have just played h6, and if he had done this, most likely I would have made a draw after knight f7, king h7, and knight g5. Black cannot take the knight because rook to h1 is simply checkmate here, since you can't block with the bishop and the king has no squares. But instead Maxime plays rook to f8, and now I go knight to f7. He plays king g8, and I play this move queen d5, which is a fairly serious mistake. What I should have played was this move queen to e6, and the reason is that if I play queen to e6 here, black doesn't really have any good moves. If you play queen takes a2, let's say king h3 for example, if black goes queen b3, it looks like on first glance black is doing okay, but I can go check king h8, and now I don't have queen g8 because black can take the queen with his queen. But after rook f8, bishop f8, I have queen e5 check, bishop g7, queen e8 check, and it's simply checkmate here at the end of the day with the queen and the knight. Additionally, after queen e6, if black plays a move like h6 for example here, I can go knight e5 check. If king h8, I fork with knight takes pawn, and after king to h7, I go queen g6. He goes king g8, I swap the rooks, and after rook takes queen takes bishop c4 check. Black has to give back the rook, because if you go king h8, I have knight f7 check, king g8, knight g5 check, rook takes bishop, and queen h7 checkmate as well. So black has to take with the rook here, but now after knight takes c4, white simply is up a pawn here. Is 4-on-3, and I have a good knight versus bishop. Knight can always jump to f5 via d6 or via e3, and it should be a very clean technical win. But instead I play queen d5, which now gives Maxime the opportunity to retreat with the queen to e7, and now I no longer have any way to win this position. This is why queen e6 is so much better, is that there is no queen e7, whereas here after queen e7, now I have to decide what am I doing with the knight on f7. So I played bishop c4 here, basically figuring that with this massive pressure on this diagonal and all kinds of fossils, I should be okay. And here Maxime plays rook takes c4, which is a mistake. What Maxime should have played here was this very quiet move, bishop to f6, ignoring everything. And now after a move like e5 and queen takes f7, black is actually completely fine here after takes, let's say bishop f7, not king f8, king f7, rook f6, and king e7. Black maybe even is better here because my pawns are a little bit loose. There's rook e3, there's rook c2, and black, if anybody can win, it will be black. So Maxime plays rook takes bishop instead, trying to relieve the pressure. I go knight h6, we get king h8, I swap the rooks, and now I go check, king g8, I play knight d6, king h8, and I take with the pawn. Now the dust has somewhat settled, but in this endgame, unlike the other one, we both have 4 pawns on the board, so it's not so simple to win. So Maxime plays b6, I play e5 here, trying to push the p up the board. Now this is a big mistake here. What I should have played was I should have put this knight on g5 first and then gone e5, and the reason I think is that here black does not have time to play queen f5, so I go check and we fork with knight h6 here. And if black plays h6 here, now I can go knight to e4 followed by e6 and queen d7, and I should be winning. So I play e5, Maxime plays h5, I play e6 here. Again, apparently knight e4 is very strong, but I go e6, Maxime plays bishop f6, and now it's very hard to play because the queen and the bishop are both guarding this pawn. If I ever move my knight, the queen will start having access to the queen side and all kinds of checks. Even queen h6 ideas exist here, so it's already quite tricky, and I don't have knight f5 because the pawn on g6 covers that square. So I go knight e4, Maxime plays bishop e7, I go queen e5, we get king h7, queen c7, goes king h6, and now I play knight c3, trying to force this knight to the d5 square so I can push p to e7. Maxime plays queen f6, I go knight to d5, he plays queen b2, and now I have to go king f3. If I were to play king h3, suddenly black has this very tricky move g5 here, which threatens a forced mate with g4. If I were to take the bishop, g4, king h4, and queen h2 would be checkmate, and I would lose the game. So after g5, I would have to play something like g4, but even here after bishop c5, there's queen a3, hg4. This king is so loose here on h3 with all these different threats on f2 and the g2 squares, and I'm not sure I would ever be able to survive this position. So I go king f3, Maxime plays bishop c5, I check on f4, he plays g5, and now I have to play queen f6. If I play any other move like queen e4, queen f2 is simply checkmate. King has no squares available. So I go queen f6, queens come off, we get king g6, I play knight d5, Maxime plays bishop d6 here, and now I go g4, creating a box. Now probably Maxime should have played g4 because after king g2, bishop d6, king f2, I really have no way to try and proceed here. Black basically just sits and waits. You can never go king f5 here because then e7 would win the bishop. You have to sack the bishop or else white gets a queen. So instead we get bishop d6. Now I play g4, h4, a4, we get bishop c5, king g2, bishop d6, king h3. We start dilly-dallying a lot, and finally I play this move knight c3, trying to be very tricky here. The reason I play knight c3 is that I saw that if Maxime plays king f6, I have knight e4 check, king takes pawn, and now at least I'm getting 2 pawns here on the king side in return for the 1 central pawn. However, it is very double-edged because the king can jump in and try to capture the pawn on c4 right away. Probably in a slow game, I would have just waited with king g2, king h3 forever, and neither side can really do anything here based on the placement of the bishop and the knight. So I go knight c3, king f6, check, takes, knight g5, king e5, king h4, and here Maxime blunders away the game with this move king d4. Now bishop to e7 here first would have drawn because I have to go king h5 to break the pin, and now after king d4, knight f7, king c4, g5, black can simply sack the bishop, go king b3, win the pawn, and this should be a pretty straightforward draw. One sample line would be something like this where I walk the king back, king b2, and then I play knight d6 here with the idea of knight c4 check. You can't push b5, I take the pawn. If you go a5, I play knight c4, king b3, knight takes b6, and it's a very easy draw. And if black were to go like king to b3 for example, there is knight c8 drawing, but even just king c1, a5, king b1, and with the king in front of these two pawns, it should be a pretty simple draw. So instead Maxime plays move king d4, and now I go knight e6 check, forking the king and the bishop. Now we're both low on time, so I wasn't sure if this was winning or not when I played it, but it seemed like the right idea. So Maxime takes the pawn, I trade the knight for the bishop, and this is simply a matter of intuition, trusting that this is actually winning, because if I'm wrong here and the black pawn gets down the board, like if the king gets back to the box here, I actually lose the game. Fortunately for me, this is winning because after g5, Maxime has to go king d5. If you play a move like king b4, I win the race by one tempo. I push the pawns, get the queen on c2, queen g5, king b3. I simply go queen c1, walk the king over, and win the pawn on c2 and win the game. So Maxime plays king d5, thinking his king is in the box because g6, king e6, g7, king f7, king g8. It of course also is a classic right triangle as well. But unfortunately for Maxime, I have my king that I can use as well. So here I go king h5, which is the only winning, maybe not the only winning move. I guess g6 also wins, but after king e6, king h5, I guess this wins as well, but it feels kind of scary to push the pawn first. So I go king h5, Maxime plays c4, now I go g6, and he plays king e6 here. If he were to go c3, after g7, c2, I queen with check, and once again I put the queen on c1, walk the king back, and win the game. So he goes king e6, I play king h6 here, not g7 by the way, because after king f7, king h6, king g8, black's king gets in front of the pawn, and now my king is not even inside the box here, because after king g5, c3, king f4, c2, I'm one move too late and I lose the game. But after I play king h6, Maxime resigns the game here because now he realizes after c3, g7, if he goes king f7, I have king h7, c2, g8, queen, and I win the game once again. So in this position after g7, Maxime resigns the game, which gives me a 5-4 lead after the 5+1 portion of the match. Now in the 3+1 portion, Maxime would hang incredibly tough. He actually outperformed me by a score of 5.5 to 3.5. So going into the final portion of the bullet, I was actually trailing by one game. I was trailing by a score of 9.5 to 8.5, but in the bullet portion I would run away with it. I think I won the first 4 or 5 games. I won the bullet portion by a final of 8-2, so I won the match, I believe, by a score, if my math is correct, of 16.5 to 11.5 if I'm not mistaken. So it ended up being a very smooth victory for me overall in today's semifinal match of the Speed Chess Championship, but it didn't feel that way. Maxime played a great match up until the bullet portion where I simply was too strong. But I move on to the grand finals, where on Friday I will be playing against none other than the former 5-time world chess champion Magnus Carlsen, who has been mowing down everybody throughout this Speed Chess Championship thus far. Now again, I feel like I'm gonna have to play a lot better than I did today. Today it was good enough, but I'm gonna have to bring my A game on Friday against Magnus. If I do, I think I will have great chances. Obviously I beat Magnus last year in the Speed Chess Championship final, so hoping for a repeat of that, hoping to win a 6th SEC in a row, but at any rate it's going to be a big dogfight on Friday. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. Make sure to smash that subscribe button below if you haven't already, and I'll be back probably on Friday with a recap after I play Magnus in the grand final of the Speed Chess Championship being held on chess.com. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.